everyone, it's Pam from Stellar Crafts by Pam, and today I have a card for you featuring some of the products from Fawn's Summer 2016 release. I started my card with a Simon Says stamp top folding card base. I'm now cutting down some Stampin' Up! Soft Sky paper, as this is going to be the sky background for my card. I cut it down to 4¼ by 5½ because it's going to fill up the entire front of the card. You can see here that I am laying out the grass borders and meadow borders from Lawn Fawn so that I can get an idea of how my scene is going to be set up. I actually previously colored these moose from the Dad and Me stamp set. I used my Zig watercolor markers and I didn't use any water. I just used a couple of colors together and blended them to get the look that you see here. I actually hope to have a video in the future showing a coloring session of how I use the Zig Clean Color Real Brush markers to color my stamped images. Now I'm cutting down some white cardstock from Close to My Heart to 5½ inches. I'm going to be using the Puffy Cloud borders from Lawn Fawn to create the clouds for my card. I end up using two different borders and I'm going to layer them on top of each other using some foam tape so that I can get some dimension. Because I wasn't sure how much of the bottom cloud I wanted to show, I ended up cutting it a little bit longer than what I was going to need. Once I lined up the two clouds how I wanted them, I went ahead and I used a tape runner to tape down the bottom cloud. I then used my cutter to cut off the excess, and now I'm using foam tape so I can pop up the other cloud on top of the first one. So now it's time to figure out how I want the grass to look. I wanted to have some basic grass in the front and then have some taller meadow type grass in the background. And because in depth, everything that is closer to you is darker, I'm using this darker green paper from Stampin' Up! To cut out the grass that's going to be in the front. And then next I'm going to use a lighter green cardstock for the background grass. So again, same thing I did with the clouds. I didn't know how tall I wanted the meadow grass to be, so I am lining up both grass cutouts and lining up my moose, and once I am happy with where the meadow grass is, I can use tape runner adhesive to adhere the meadow grass down. I then cut off the excess. Then it's time to line up where I want my front grass to go. For this, I'm going to use tape foam adhesive and cut it in half and use that to adhere the grass and give it some dimension. Now that my scene is in place, it's time to start lining up where I want my moose to go and adhere them down to the card. I found that the best way to do this was to take the Love Yes sentiment and line it up on the grid on my cutting mat. Then I could adhere the little moose to one end of the Love Yes sentiment as if it's a string and he's holding one end of the sentiment in his mouth. Then while keeping the Love Yes sentiment straight on my grid, I can adhere the larger moose to the other side of the Love Yes sentiment as if he was holding the other side of the string in his mouth. Since the sentiment is already adhered to the moose, that makes it very simple to pick up the whole thing and use my foam squares to pop it up on my scene. Now, what I did here is I used a thinner foam square than what I used for my grass in the foreground. That way it looked like the moose were in between the foreground grass and the background grass. I always feel like that little bit of dimension created by using foam tape really just brings the card all together. At this point in creating my card, this was as far as my planning had gone before creating my card. So this is where I decided to improvise and use a few more die cuts to add to my card. In this case, you can see that I'm extending the string from the Love Ya sentiment and having it actually come from a kite that the moose are flying in the sky. When I first got these stamp sets, I stamped out all the images onto some watercolor paper and then colored them in using my Zig markers. That's why you see in the video that I'm coloring in the kite string for the kite because I didn't know how I was going to use it until I added it to this card. So I'm using some foam squares to pop up the kite on the card, again to add some dimension, and I just used some liquid glue to adhere the string to the kite and the moose. Again, at this point, I thought I was done with my card, but then I decided to go back and add some more finishing touches. Here you can see I'm using the Spectrum Noir Sparkle pen to add some glitter to the bows on the kite tail. At this point, my card is pretty much finished, and since my background piece was going to take up the whole space of the front of the card base, I decided to go ahead and use tape runner adhesive on the card base rather than on the background piece, as it did have so much dimension. For the last finishing touch on the card, I decided that I wanted to add a yellow sun. So I used this W+9 Sunshine Layers sun to die cut a sun from Stampin' Up! Yellow cardstock. And because it was two pieces, I went ahead and laid them down together and used my tape runner adhesive to attach them together before attaching them to my card. I decided to have the sun just peeking out from the clouds on the scene on my card. And again, to finish up and add some final touches to the sun, I used the Spectrum Noir glitter pen again to add some shine and sparkle to the sun. And when I tilt the card into the light, that's when you can really see the sparkle on the sun as well as the kite. So now that finally finishes off my card of my two moose flying a kite together. A list of supplies that I use will be listed below. If you have any questions, please feel free to comment. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you'd like to see more. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye.